Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Pinardville Ad Hoc Committee meeting. Before we get started, excuse me, I would like to send out condolences to one of our regular committee members who has had a death in her family. So, Cheryl Anderson, we're thinking of you. Okay, let's get started. The first item on the agenda is the approval of minutes for the from July 30th. Do I have a motion?
Could we introduce ourselves just for the record?
Sure. Mike?
Mike Lawler, Goffstown Industrial Corp.
Dick Gamache, residence, Pinardville.
Tony Martz.
Rosemary Garrettson, resident.
Gala Bruck, recording secretary.
Mark LeMay, Selectman's Rep.
John Heichel, Planning Board Rep.
Andrew Cattert, Economic Development Council Rep.
Brian Rose, I'm Planning and Zoning Administrator.
Yeah.
Bill Furlong, St. Anselm College.
And Derek Horn, Economic Development Coordinator.
Thank you. Now, do I have a motion regarding the minutes?
Make that motion.
Do I have a second?
I second that motion.
Do we have any conversation, discussion, changes, amendments on those minutes? Hearing none, do we have anybody saying aye?
Aye.
Any saying nay? Any abstentions? I guess it passes unanimously, Gail. Okay. Next up is...
Before we get into the agenda, Rosemary, I think it's worth having a discussion about, because today's agenda is mostly about, or completely about the ordinance, which is now overlapping with the plan Pinardville community plan. So I think it's, since we've had so much input from both the committee and the public on the community plan, I think it's worth a discussion and some follow-up so that we're clear as to where that is in our mix and in our schedule. Because we're really looking at August 20th meeting again to recommend one way or the other the community plan to the planning board. This ordinance is something that is not really going to go forward to the planning board until sometime in September and is really in a process that's going to take us into December, January, February. So I think that we probably have heard quite a bit, if not all comments on the plan. And I had a sense from our last meeting that Brian Rose might have had additional comments that we haven't seen yet, but I think we should have some discussion on the issues that have been raised previously.
How does the rest of the board feel about that?
I think it's a good idea.
Anybody else?
Clarity is good.
Okay, let's discuss. Do you have some things in particular that... John?
Madam Chair, I have a motion to make
Okay.
for the committee.
All right, go ahead.
My motion is with respect to the consultant's final draft dated July 18, 2013, to make the following changes. And I have copies here for everyone on the board to view. And I have some for the public if they'd like to have some as well.
John, is there enough for me to keep a copy?
There's enough. Yes, there's plenty for everyone to have copies.
It just makes it easier for me.
Thank you, sir.
Are these all the same thing?
They're all the same, yes.
Oh, just a moment.
Pass these back down in case somebody from the public wants one.
Madam Chair, with respect to the consultant's final draft dated July 18, 2013, I'd like to make the following changes. with a motion. On page 20, under guiding principles, to delete the paragraph starting TPUDC worked with the residents of Pinardville to identify a set of enduring guiding principles and replace it with the following paragraph. This process identified a set of enduring guiding principles critical to the current and future quality of life in Pinardville. These principles embody the core philosophy and common vision expressed by the community. The conclusions and strategies which this plan endorses to implement these principles include the following. 1. Commercial and economic development in Pinardville need to be encouraged and supported in a manner which does not have an adverse impact on Pinardville's residential neighborhoods. 2. Any zoning amendments proposed or adopted in reliance on this plan should be limited in scope and reach to A, the Mass Road corridor from the Manchester line to Route 114, and B, the west side of Daniel Plummer Road corridor from Mass Road to the Bedford line, and in each case to parcels within approximately 150 feet of the center line of said roads of the focus area. 3. Residential neighborhoods abutting the focus area should not be disturbed or rezoned as a result of this plan. No use of the town's power of eminent domain should be used for private benefit or gain as a result of this plan. 5. Illustrations and maps in the plan, including those showing possible new streets and additional buildings, are not intended to approve or support construction of those items, all of which should be undertaken only at the request of the affected parcel owners and in a manner consistent with town zoning as now or hereafter adopted. And 6, the abundance of affordable housing in Pinardville needs to be supported and preserved. While other areas of Goffstown are examined, and only examined, to encourage similar contributions to an affordable housing stock.
Do I have a second on this motion?
I'll second it.
Discussion.
I'd like to comment on that if I could, please.
Yep.
I have read and reviewed the final draft, and with this motion, it is the only approach I will support at this time. Certainly any sort of commitment other than local to the corridor will fail, and the commercial industrial corridor is what must be embraced by the community, as I stated at our first ad hoc committee meeting at St. A's, but the entire area was included. I will only support a plan which is specific to Pinardville's commercial industrial corridor, as well as the west side corridor of Daniel Plummer Road from Mass Road to the Bedford line, as outlined in this motion, and no other parts of Goffstown zoning will be affected. Now, the committee has heard the public, and I agree with the public, that all residential changes to this plan must be removed, or it is at great risk of total failure.
Anybody else have any comments? Tony?
I think that this does address most, if not all, of the issues we've heard from residents in the area, keeping in mind that this community plan is really a conceptual plan. It's a starting point to support the potential for rezoning some areas of Pinardville. And we're going to have more than one bite at that apple. This plan is going to eventually get before the planning board. The zoning ordinance that we're beginning to talk about is going to go through a longer process than the community plan went through. So I think that I think these points make it clear, hopefully, that the committee has heard the public and has responded appropriately.
Anybody else?
I just want
Andy.
to clarify. So it would be removing this paragraph, placing this in, and then keeping the text that follows with the icons. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Anyone else?
And I'd like to also comment that basically This is removing the 4 and the 5 version. This is the 3, and this is the 3 and the 4, and removing the 5.
What do you mean by 3 and 4?
Uh,
The date?
No, CD.
Oh, okay.
Removing CD3 and
CD3 and-
Campus SD.
Yeah, CD3 and Campus SD, and only leaving CD4 and 5. We have 2 versions,
That's 2 versions of the zoning, not of the plan.
yes.
Okay, does anybody else have any comments?
I'd also like to say, Madam, I'm sorry, Brian, why don't you go on? I've done a lot of research on this in the last few days. I truly understand the concerns of the folks who have spoken. This committee, what I feel that this will do is the best way to keep this plan moving forward. I don't think it is this committee's ability. I don't think we have the authority to stop, let's say, what we're doing. I think this needs to go through the process. It will, but it needs to go, I think it needs to go through the process this way, through this committee, and then the planning board is where the rubber will hit the road, or will meet the road. And and I think that's where the majority of everything can be done with this at the next step. It's out of the selectmen's hand, I believe, because they approved the funding. The ad hoc committee has no authority to stop this. Everything right now is to keep this moving forward, only for discussion purposes, to get it to the planning board so we can really hash it out there.
Brian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to make a suggestion that perhaps the committee could table this discussion at least until the end of this meeting, so that the consultant, Brian Wright, and Derek and I can sort of explain the differences between the 2 zoning ordinance changes that you have in front of you, the with CD3 and the without CD3 and the campus SD. The only reason I say that is because if you approve that motion now without having even been presented with the 2 options, I think you should at least understand what the 2 options are before you write one of them off. And that would be my recommendation.
Tony?
I think that train has left the station. We're done with any scope, as far as I'm concerned, that deals with the residential areas. That was never part of the initial proposal or idea for this project, and it's just gotten way the heck out of hand. And it's a waste of our time to try to hold on to that. I don't think that the committee ever supported that. The initial scope of work was to look at all of Pinardville, but then to refocus down or drill down on the area we should focus on. And I've said before, that area clearly in the community plan as it's been drafted is on the corridor and on the industrial areas. There's no reason for any of us to go through, frankly, there's no reason for us to put the residents through the heartache of worrying about those types of issues. Let's get on with the work that we were sent here to do.
Anybody else? Seeing no further discussion, we'll take a vote on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? I guess it's a unanimous vote, Gail. Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
All right, moving on to the explanation of the character-based development ordinance. Brian Wright, you're with us, I presume?
I'm here.
Welcome. What can you tell us?
Live. Tennessee Brian, right here. Well,
overview of the document. I've also got Bill Wright with me, if you guys remember him from the Planapalooza. He's a form-based zoning guru and legal expert on these types of things. And so if we get into any technical questions during the Q&A portion, he'll be here to help us out with that. But I'm going to say pretty high level because Brian and Derek have a really nice follow-up that gets into some of the specifics and does a good job of comparing and contrasting the proposed zoning to the existing zoning. So that's really nice to be able to see. So I'm going to flip through the documents, and you guys, if I get ahead of my slides, there's like a 7-second lag on the screen flip. Oh, actually, Derek, you guys are doing it, right?
Yes.
I forgot. All right, perfect. Never mind. So, next slide. So right now, I've got the organization of section 18 on my screen. You see that, as well as, are you looking at a 2-page spread there?
No, I'm on a 1-page spread. If you'd like it,
You get a view, and then page display, and then 2-page setting, or 2-page view.
give me just a second.
All right. Also, make sure you check the one down below that says show cover page in 2-page view as well. Otherwise, the pagination will be off.
I'm still only seeing one screen.
So you can see page display under view, and then 2-page view.
Yeah, I tried to help you out by hiding all the menus. So give me a second.
Oh yeah, when you're on full screen mode, it doesn't work.
How do I get the...
You can do it in...
Go ahead.
You can do it in read mode, but not full screen mode.
Okay.
Reading.
It just makes it a lot easier if we can see both pages at the same time, but it's not impossible to go through a single page.
It might be the only way.
Get dizzy trying to follow the mouse.
Yeah. Brian, I think, unfortunately, I think it'd be better if we just go through it 1 page at a time.
Yeah.
Apologize.
Okay, no problem. All right, so I've got preface page C on my screen right now. And what you see there is an example of showing thoroughfares and frontages, and that illustration is a key component to understanding how a form-based approach works. Because one of the key components of form-based is thinking about the concept of a frontage, and frontage is simply how the building addresses the street. And so you have the private frontage, which is from the front of the structure to the property line or the back of the sidewalk, and then the public frontage, which is from the back of the sidewalk to the street, where the street starts. So that's going to be something that's key to understand, and it's kind of laid out. And just so you guys know, I'm skipping a lot of pages here because it's a long document. So I just kind of jumped to the things that are important. But that was something that at the very beginning that is important to think about when you're looking at character-based zoning. So next slide.
Well, before you go,
is the organization.
Hold on, Brian. We have a question.
when you say public frontage, you don't mean owned by the public, do you? You mean just what's essentially in the front of a building?
No, it is owned. It is public property within the right-of-way.
So it is literally whatever is in the legal right-of-way. It's not taking additional property. It's just defined by whatever the right-of-way is.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's no taking of property intended or necessary in a form-based approach at all. In fact, we go to great lengths to make sure that that's not necessary and it's not something that we recommend to any community we work in.
Thank you.
All right. So the next is the organization of the document, and this is kind of in a few little tiles here, lays it out. But we can skip on to the table of contents. And the table of contents is lays out the document in more detail. Obviously, this is where you're going to go when you need to find something. But the document starts off with a general section that has the purpose and intent of the document and how it's laid out and how it relates to other documents. The administration of things, and that's all, kind of the technical nitty-gritty nuts and bolts of the document, which is, for most people, not all that exciting to hear about, and most people don't even need to look at it, really, unless they're just interested in that. But so that's what's in that section. I'm not covering that. Then the next section goes on to the regulating plan, and the regulating plan is just the new zoning map. And so this section describes that zoning map for the particular study area, and talks about what's in that and how you comply with it, and any special requirements that may be applicable. Following that section, you move on to character districts, special districts, and civic zones, and you within that you actually have a general overview and description of what the new zoning districts will be, and we'll get into those in detail in a minute, and any special districts, and as well as civic zones, and it describes what that all means, and so nobody's confused about that. Moving on to the next page, you have the building and lot plans and standards, and that's essentially for anybody who's doing development in the community that's small in scale. So, they're doing a lot, or they're, changing something, developing a new building, or something that's really small in scale, and it goes through all the specifics of what are necessary for that. The next section after that is the development plans and standards, and development plans and standards is when somebody has a larger piece of property, and there's a certain threshold at which they're subject to the development plan, and you're able to, that's only applicable to those larger parcels, not to a smaller parcel. So there'll be more standards that would be applicable. So, for instance, on a larger development, you might be proposing some new roads within the property in a new development, and so those would be, explained and spelled out in there. Whereas you wouldn't be doing those, a new road if you're simply just doing development on an infill lot. And if you're doing a development plan, you also have to do building and lot plan. So the standards in that become applicable. But for most applicants, based on the amount of land that you guys have left over, and especially now based on the vote that you just took, it's not likely that any development plans will move forward, very many at all. And then the last section is the definitions, and it just explains all of the terms that you may not be familiar with, and it's been synced up with your existing definitions and tied in. So some things will be familiar and some things will be new, but we try to spell it out as clearly as possible. Now, the thing to remember when you're looking at a form-based zoning ordinance is that just like your existing ordinance, it's a legal document. And so sometimes you might read something and you say, wow, that seems technical, or that seems like it's said in a challenging kind of way to get through. Most of those types of things would be in that kind of the first section, where it's explaining how it's all tied into state regulations and your existing zoning and all of that, where it needs to be much more kind of lawyerly. And then later on in other sections it becomes more straightforward. But in any case, we always have to make sure that we're keeping in mind that it is a legal document. The other thing is, when we do these zoning ordinances, and people come to review them, and citizens look at them, and steering committees come to look at them, and we often find that there's a desperation to understand the document because they're being asked to, where most people have never been asked to or even had the opportunity to unless they just set about to do it and went and got your existing ordinance to actually evaluate and understand your existing ordinance. So if we gave 100 people in the town a pop quiz on your existing zoning ordinance, nearly all of them would fail. So as we go through the document, kind of keep that in the back of your mind. We want to, and we have the opportunity to make sure that this is understandable and straightforward, but also when you compare it to your existing zoning, if nothing else, we've made it at least easier to look at and probably made it more straightforward than your existing zoning ordinance. So moving on, you have, and this is a good one, if we could add the two-page view so we can quickly get through. This is the boundary map, and on the next slide, and you have, this was when we were looking at the entire area, and based on the vote you guys just took, the next slide, which would be page 4, shows what the boundary area will be now. That is simply just the commercial and industrial areas being pulled in and everything else being left as it is and unprotected. And your existing zoning just still covers it as it did previously. So that's what you got with this boundary map. So here we are. Next slide, page 9, is the beginning of the regulating plan section, and it's got a bunch of words and stuff that describe it and explain it. Going on to a few slides from that to page 11. We have the example regulating plan. This was the version that incorporates the residential, and the next slide doesn't. And it only shows the areas within the commercial and industrial corridors. So that's also called page 11 because I took it from the other one and incorporated it. In the new version, there will only be one regulating plan, but we had both so you can see it. Moving on, 2 more slides up. We've got the character district, special districts, and civic zone section. Next slide. You start to see each of the zones generally described. So page 14, this CD3 will no longer be relevant because it is a residential district. This was what was going to preserve and protect existing residential. And then you've got the next page, CD4 and CD5. These are the 2 zones that will be applicable now. Looking at the general urban district, which would basically be the majority of the corridor, and then CD5 would simply be the center, which we're looking at the Pinardville Common area. That's where that's zone currently, and there's a few slight differences you can see in the imagery above. I'll get to that in a minute, actually. 2 more slides. Building and lot plans and standards section. We've got 2 more slides, please. We have another key concept that's page 21, the idea of lot layers. And in the conventional zoning ordinance, it simply just talks about this is allowed to happen this far from the street or set back this far from the right-of-way, et cetera. The way that we set these character-based zoning ordinances up is you have this concept called lot layers. And so it's a way to kind of easily describe things, and it allows for some more variety and more flexibility. So rather so specific as to say parking must occur, in this many feet from the right-of-way, you say it can occur in the 3rd lot layer. So the diagram here is showing the concept of the primary frontage lot layers, and the primary frontage is where the street at the short end of the buildings are facing, and we need to label that actually. The short end of the buildings are facing the gable. That's the primary frontage line. And so the lot layers are moving backwards from that. So you go from darker blue to the lighter to the lightest, and each of those layers is then shown with the lines out to the side. So it's a key concept and important to understand because we talk about within the ordinance certain things happening in each of those layers. It's not the most important concept, but it is something that is you need to make sure you read that portion carefully. The next slide, we get into the more detailed descriptions of. Yes?
Brian, going back to your layers, could you explain why that's important and how that's different from what we've got today? I mean, we have just different setbacks, but why is this concept, which is a completely new concept, to us at least, why is it important and what advantage does it provide us?
I think probably one of the key components is when you deal with parking, that's a key element of it. What we find is that it's a good way to really be able to allow some more flexibility, which is, as we've heard from the community, really important. And you're able to be able to define things in a little bit more loose way. But you're able to also understand and be specific to a certain degree. Typically, when you're just looking at layers in a conventional way, you don't have the sort of fine-grained thinking about the way a lot, what happens on a lot and where it happens. And so this adds a level of sophistication to the process to be able to describe the lot. I mean, you really think about it as kind of the finest grain of zoning, because here you have, you're zooming in on the lot, and the lot has its own zones. We call them layers, but they're, for all intents and purposes, each of these is a zone. Not that it'll be a different use or anything like that, but you're able to set these layers up, and it helps, as you see when you move throughout the rest of the document, how the layering system plays in. And do you have anything?
Yeah, this is Bill Wright. One of the things you might think of in terms of the lot layer is that Brian hasn't discussed, I don't think yet, the importance of the private frontage to the whole idea of character-based zoning. It's one of the key elements of making sure that the ultimate streetscape and environment that is created ends up having the character that you want. The idea of lot layers relates to that private frontage concept in that, in the very first layer, what you're talking about is essentially the setback, that, how far the building has to be set back from the lot. And nothing can go on there except for, the porch, may be able to encroach a little bit there, or the stoop or whatever might be on the front of the building. It's a really important concept when you talk about locations that are appropriate for loading, for trash collection, for parking. Those things you don't want to happen in the first lot layer because it all negatively impacts the private frontage. And so you have, you'll see there'll be provisions that say that parking in, say in CD5, need to be in the second or third lot layer as opposed to the first lot layer. You could go, in every single case, you could say there shall be no whatever in the first lot layer, but instead, character-based codes tend to be more prescriptive than proscriptive. In other words, they don't prohibit things as much as they ask that things be done. And so it's written more, and the flip side is not saying you can't do this stuff here. It's instead written, these are the things that are appropriate to happen here. I think there's a sort of another piece of this that could help you understand that. That's essentially the explanation of lot layers. They're most closely associated with what might be the appropriate things that can go on, and what types of building elements are appropriate in those certain things. There's a concept in most character-based codes of a principal building versus an accessory building. And the principal building is always the one that is at the frontage. It's the one you want to create that streetscape. The accessory building provision will always say that the accessory building needs to be in the third lot layer. And then you don't regulate what's going on in the third lot layer. You're much more interested in what's going on right there at the frontage all the time. And this gives you a way of having different things appear in those lot layers that you aren't as concerned about in terms of the way they may impact the character of the street.
That said, though, in the third layer, there are still setbacks and things like that.
Yeah.
So an accessory building couldn't necessarily be jammed right up against, a neighboring property. It's really tough to abide by that. But it allows for, with the exception of meeting the setback restrictions, you're able to put something wherever you want to put it because it doesn't have a real impact.
Yeah, but because for essentially an accessory building, because it's behind the principal building, you really don't have much care what it may look like. It'll be limited by height and by how many feet from the lot lines it can be. It's still got to comply with setback. But other than that, you don't really. It's not something that you care to regulate in character-based zoning.
It's a good way to help protect individual property rights as well, because the person who owns the property, if we kind of get all up in their business and what happens in the third lot layer, all of a sudden, just a simple outbuilding or shed ends up becoming more expensive, or they can't do what they want to do, and those sorts of concerns that we heard from the community are able to easily be accommodated for within this layering structure as well.
Thank you.
All right. So moving on to the specific character district explanations. The first group here we can just skip because those are all CD3. Go on to page 25, which is the beginning of CD4. And what you can see is on the first page, the artist rendering that was done showing the possibility for what the corridor could look like using these configurations. And so you'll start to see mixed-use buildings, buildings with commercial on the ground floor and office or residential above, but they're still sort of separated one from the next and has a much more of a New England village-y kind of a feel to it. Still, we've shown some one-story buildings, which a lot of places aren't necessarily interested in doing, but just kind of recognizing the market potential and the lack of demand for new growth and development happening. We thought that it was appropriate to allow some one story to carry on in the area. Below that rendering, you see some photographs of some examples that could be found in the zone. When we show these photographs and renderings, we always run the risk of somebody going, well, I don't like that building, or I don't like, in this example, a mansard roof, or I don't like whatever. So it gets to be tricky. If you guys have different photographs you want to include, we're happy to swap them out. But these are indicative of what the zone might look like. Moving on to the next page, page 26. We've got the CD4. This is kind of where we start to get more technical with it. That first page we just showed was more the kind of artsy, touchy-feely page. But here on this next page, on page 26, we go from illustrations to tables, and tables are regulatory. And so what you can see in this view is all of these rows of text with numbers and metrics and number of feet and all that are all the details that are specifically explaining setbacks and building heights and what yard types you have, and I'll explain more about yard types in a minute because I understand there's some confusion about that. But the image above shows it's tied to it. So you see A, B, C, D, E, F, and each of those numbers you can see where those measurements are taken from. And again, this is an example. This isn't you don't have to build this building in this spot, and you can see that with the building setbacks and stuff, like on A, it goes from 0 feet to 12 feet. So you have a 12-foot variation within that front setback, which allows for the individual property owner to put their building where they want to put it within reason, And the same thing when you're looking at building heights. We have a height limit, but it's just 2.5 stories is the limit, but they could do less if they wanted to. So each of these different zones and districts gets into that. These diagrams and tables explain that, and Derek and Brian are going to go through these more in detail in their PowerPoint in just a minute. But the key component is that each of these elements is different from the next zone, while they have some overlap, so that there's not a stark contrast from one zone to the next. These are the key components of creating this specific character in these certain areas that are zoned CD4. So moving on to the next image, page 27. This is the rear view, showing what happens from the back, in the back of the property. So here you can see an accessory building. In this case, it's a garage with a living space or workspace above it. So you actually end up, by allowing things like these accessory structures, you end up making the property owner be able to get the most value from their property as they can. In some cases, if you guys allow rentals, then people can rent that out to somebody who's new in town, or to the college student, or somebody who's starting a new family can live above the garage, or they can simply use it themselves. They don't have to rent it out, and that's up to you guys to decide if you want to allow those kind of things to happen. But you can see the parking happening in the rear, and a rear alley, a rear lane that might be possible would be accommodated for here. And you see the parking location listed by the third lot layer, and the uses are referring you to the use table that happened later on. And the different frontage types that are allowed and appropriate in this zone are also listed on this page. Keep in mind, this page is supposed to be viewed side by side with the last page, so some of these things relate to the other page as well. So that's how that works. Moving on 2 pages to page 28, getting into the CD5 character district. You can notice in the rendering that it's much more urban, and not much more, actually, just a little bit more urban in nature. The buildings are closer together, maybe more attached. Still showing a lot of pitched roofs in the rendering and some of the images below. Now, one thing to note when you're looking at the images, for instance, that brick building there, that's pretty nice looking building, looks expensive, all that. Nothing's requiring that building to be built. The thing that's important is kind of how that building relates to the street. It relates to the pedestrians on the ground floor, relates to the sidewalk. It got certain height characteristics. And so we're thinking about that, because what we know is that not every place is going to be like Pinardville, and you guys have your own unique architectural style and expressions there, and that's great. And so if we could take a picture of the same thing that's already happening there, that image could go here as well. You guys just don't have kind of the walkable streetscapes and stuff currently, so you have to show these images from elsewhere. Moving on to the next page, page 29, you can start to see again the more technical drawing and the technical specifics of it. Here again, even the setback is actually not that much different. It's from 0 to 10 feet, only a small variation in that setback. But you start to see some of the lot widths are different, and building height can go up a little bit more. And so you guys get how this works, obviously. And the next page would be again the rear view. You can see the lot and how you start to see larger parking areas that might occur in the rear in a more urban area. And then moving on to page 32, we've got the yard types, which I just referred to a minute ago in the tables. This is also a key component. This table used to be called lot disposition, which means how the building is disposed on the lot, where the building sits on the lot, how the building sits on the lot, and everybody's like, what in the world does disposition mean? So we tried to simplify it and use more layman's terms and call them yard types. And so the thing to make sure you key in on is the definition of each of these yard types that is listed down the side there. I'll just call them out for you here and describe it. I'm not going to read it to you. I'll just tell you what it's about. So edge yard is a building on the lot, sitting in the middle of the lot where you have yard of some sort all the way around the building. So it goes all the way around the edge of the property or all the way around the edge of the building on all sides. Side yard is when a building is set to one side, so like a zero lot line condition, and the yard would all be on one side or the other. Rear yard would be like you'd see in the more urban areas where you have the buildings will be attached, so there's no room for a side yard because the buildings are touching each other, and they're scooched up to the front property line, so there's no room for a front yard, so we call that a rear yard type. One thing to note is you can see right now in the version on your screen, it still says CD3 on there, so that would obviously go away as you move forward based on the decision you guys just made, and you end up not having to worry about that. I know there was some concern about rear yard not being allowed in certain zones meant people can't have a backyard, and in fact that's not what it means. It just means that you would have edge yard, which allows for a backyard as well. So just to clarify, and also in a side yard condition, you have a rear yard in that. So that's kind of an important thing to note when you think about how building sits on a lot. So it's just a good way to describe it in pretty simple terms. Moving on to the next page, page 33. This actually is a diagram describing the concept that my dad was just talking about with the principal building, back building, and outbuilding. So you can see how if you were to, for instance, add on to a structure, these would be the terminologies that you'd use to describe those additional pieces of a building. And we know that in New England, you guys love adding on to buildings over the years, and so it becomes important as people start to evolve their properties, to understand these concepts and allow for that to happen. The next page, page 34, pretty straightforward, but everything's good to have it spelled out. Setback designation, so it just shows front, side, and rear setbacks and where those are on the lot. The next page is 35, looking at the private frontage type. And I mentioned that one of the key components to understanding character-based zoning is that it focuses on the frontages of buildings, how buildings relate to the street, more so than what happens in the back. So here you have a description and a visual of each of the different frontage types. That first one would likely go away since it was only allocated in the CD3. But you still then would have porch frontage type. Moving on to the next page, you have stoops. And so if you had a row house or something like that, or even a single-family detached house or a building that looks like a single-family detached house that is now commercial, some of these would have, when you see them converted, historically they would have had a stoop. But for commercial purposes now, they tend to have a ADA accessible entrance, so that would have to be dealt with some way. There's the concept of a forecourt frontage type, which is where the building is, you've seen it where you kind of walk between two wings of the building and the main entrance is set back. We have a shop front type, which is pretty straightforward, as everybody recognizes a shop front. And the office front type, which is, it's still commercial in its nature, but it doesn't have the gigantic, really large glass windows that you typically see in a shop front, but it's clearly not or never, ever was residential in nature, and so we call it an office frontage type. Moving on to page 38, here you have a visual illustration of the frontage lines, lot lines, facades, and elevations, because those terms are used throughout the document, and so we want everybody to understand what each of those things is. And so the graphic helps with that instead of just a text-based definition. Moving on to page 40. This is the use table. So, we talk all about the character and the form and how things look and all of that. And we say that use isn't that important, but it's still here and it's still regulated. And right now we haven't filled out this table at all. That's for you guys to decide what you want to go in each zone. We've included, I think, currently all your existing uses in the table. So really you just have to decide which ones go where. And then we have some mixed use things that you don't currently have in your zoning, I think, that are incorporated also. Moving on to page 44, we've got all the parking specifics and the regulations that deal with parking. You have, how do you calculate parking and the requirements for each general use type. We keep it pretty high level, though, rather than getting into, saying which type of lodging and we talk about number of parking spaces per bedroom, or, what type of office it is. Is it a medical office or a legal office or whatever? It's just an office, and so we have that called out in this table. On the next page, page 45, you've got the concept of shared parking, which a lot of zoning ordinances don't have currently. Conventional and old zoning ordinances don't have that. They just figured that no one would ever want anyone else to use their parking lot, even if they're not using it. And so here, this anticipates the concept of when two uses of certain types are adjacent or want to allow each other to use their parking, this is how you would calculate that once a shared parking agreement has been reached. Then the next page, page 46, we look at, since you guys are a commercial area, and I don't recall hearing anybody complaining about drive-thrus during the Planapalooza, we incorporated how you deal with a drive-thru in the character-based setting, and showed some examples here of how a drugstore could work, or a bank. They're two of the most typical suburban strip drive-thru users. And so we talk about how that works and where they should go. 2 pages on page 48, you see the signage standards that are all broken down here, again, visually, because when you're looking at creating a walkable place, you have to think about some different signage types than you currently have. It's not all about big highway signs anymore. It's about things that are visible from the highway, but also that are pedestrian in scale and placement. And so you've got the signage standards here on the next 2 pages. And then moving on to page 55, development plans and standards. This goes, as I mentioned before, into when somebody has a large-scale piece of property that they're looking at developing. This tells them what they have to do, all the specifics, what are the requirements, what do you have to submit. And if you look at page 61, you start to see thoroughfare types that are all described, again, in very specific details with, the width of parking and the width of the planting strip and the width of driving lanes and where the parking goes and how it relates to public frontages and all of those kind of things. And you start to see in the next 4 or 5 pages different types of streets that might be anticipated. The first couple were neighborhood streets, and so they, at least one of them, can go away. And then we've got more commercial streets in the last 2. And then we have a special street for in the common area that could be, it's called Park Street, but it could be residential or commercial, where you've got buildings on one side, the thoroughfare adjacent to them, and then a park, which would be the new town common, would be on the other side. So that's how that works. And then on the next page, on page 66 and 67, we have how you deal with bicycle provisions, cycle tracks and bicycle lanes and arrows, depending on what is appropriate to happen in different parts of the corridor. Each of those is spelled out in how you do it. And page 68 has some public planting standards, so it starts to look at tree shapes, but then also some specific species that are called out. Page 71 is all about civic spaces, and we talked about, as we were going through the process, everybody started to realize there was a lack of civic space besides just ball fields and things like that. And so here we've incorporated a bunch of different civic space types. The first
group are pretty large scale on page 71, and many of them might not be applicable now. But if you move on to page 72, besides the one called Plaza that's blank, there should be an image there. So we just noticed that. These are much more small scale and intimate civic spaces that would be appropriate in for different developments to occur along the corridor. And so there's civic space requirements throughout the document that are key to these specific types. But instead of just saying generic open space, these are all called out and defined as to what they are. And then on the page 77 is the beginning of the definition section, and nothing needs explaining there, it's just the definitions. So the really, really high level overview of what's in the document, and kind of as a really just an orientation for you guys, now that you've had a little bit of time to look at it. So that's what we've got for you today.
Thank you, Brian. Brian and Derek, did you have some comparisons for us?
Yes, we do. Brian and I went through, Brian, for a long time I did work as a zoning enforcement officer for Goffstown, which now Brian does as a zoning administrator. So we have a lot of experience dealing with the zoning ordinance on a daily basis, but some of the committee members may not be as familiar with it. So what we did is we looked at the existing zoning as it is now in the study area, and we compared it against both regulating plans, the regulating plans that included the CD3 and SD campus, and the regulating plan that focused more on the corridor. So our presentation is set up to discuss both. I think we'll kind of go through the CD3 based on the committee's motion earlier tonight and really focus on the comparison of the zoning along the corridor and along Daniel Plummer. So here is the current zoning, and we do have zoning maps up here up front for anyone who would like one to look along with. Basically, along Mass Road, the majority is commercial, where it transitions into the RSBO, which is the Residential Small Business and Office District, as it approaches the 114A intersection. And then we have industrial land on Daniel Plummer with some commercial where the old Benchmark site is down south of St. Anselm Drive. And the majority of the brown in here is the residential 2 area, and the yellow would be our residential 1 area, both just different density residential zoning districts within the study area. Again, we're going to skip through this one primarily, but just for reference, this was the regulating plan that included CD3 and a special district around the campus. As the committee has voted to take that out at this point, we look at the second regulating plan that was provided by the consultant. And what this has is still the CD4 zone along Mass Road, and also a little bit on the Daniel Plummer where it wasn't previously, and I'll show you that in a future slide. And then the RS, the Residential Small Business and Office District, is now would transform into the CD4 district. So again, you've got your RSBOD, which would transform into the CD4. You also have some other RSBO that's down here across from where the Watoy is. There's also a Allstate office where the old D'Angelo's is down here before you get to the fire station that was RSBO. That would transform into the CD4. And then you also have around the intersection of College Road and Mass Road would go to CD5, which is, again, a little bit more high density. So the regulating plan, as was provided by the consultant, those are the changes in the map. And Brian will talk a little bit about what we really focused on for this first presentation was to focus on the differences in setbacks, lot setbacks where buildings can go, lot widths, lot coverage, those kind of items that are very specific to very quantitative or very qualitative. You know, you can.
That's all for new construction, right?
This is all for new construction.
So if someone had a house, it burned down, he could get a permit to rebuild that house on that size foundation. He wouldn't have to say, oh, now I gotta lose 20 feet to go back because of the new ordinance.
Provided they follow, our zoning ordinance has provisions for when a structure is destroyed by natural causes. And there are some time limit provisions in there. But again, I don't think focusing on the residential, as you take out the CD3, you may not want to necessarily focus on that as much. And we can almost talk on that on a case by case, whereas now when you look at the corridor, the majority of that is zoned in the commercial. But yes, any pre-existing non-conforming use does have protections under our zoning ordinance. Yeah.
Okay. So just to kind of recap, I just threw this slide in there to sort of explain in general terms which current zoning districts we had that were being proposed to change to a new name or a new zoning type through this zoning ordinance that we're proposing. Obviously, we'll pass over the first bullet point, residential 1 and residential 2, changing to CD3. The second one being commercial and RSBO2 changing to CD4, and the industrial basically changing into a special district that would have some industrial regulations put onto it that we still need to actually develop that. But taking out the part about Surratt Field, which is now not really applicable anyway either, because that's outside the, well, I'm not sure if, that wasn't included on the map, so I'm guessing that's outside of the study area now. So use is permitted. As Brian stated earlier, we've got a blank use table that we as a committee need to work on and fill out. That basically will be up to us to kind of determine, okay, what uses do we want to be in each zone that's under our new proposed zoning ordinance. And just to make it easy, he did set it up so that the same uses that are in our current table would be also in this new table. And I did hear him mention that he has a few extra mixed-use type uses that weren't in our current table that he added in so that it would work right. So the Character District 3, I'm going to skip over all of this. This was basically just a comparison between the residential zones and the CD3 zone. The CD4 district, this is just an image that, one of the images that was generated by TPUDC during the Planapalooza, and was kind of indicative of what type of development would appear in this zone. So I just wanted to kind of show a comparison between setbacks from our current zones and what is proposed in the CD4 zone. So if you can see on this, I apologize for those who have visionary issues and can't see from the back of the room or whatever. If the text is too small, I apologize. But we have two existing zones that will be sort of converted into one: the RSBO2 and the commercial, and then that would be converted into this with the proposed zoning. And what this does is it actually reduces the setback requirement significantly from the RSBO2 zone, and even significantly from the commercial zone when you're looking at a 25-foot setback here in the residential RSBO2, 10-foot in the commercial, and then it goes from a range down to a range of 0 to 12. So you can allow buildings to get much closer to the street with that. Same thing with sides. You can see how it decreases down to 5 feet from higher numbers, and the rear as well, where you have a 30-foot rear and a 25 down to possibly even 3 feet. Now these numbers are, I want to make the caveat that we can change any of these numbers to whatever numbers we want them to be. If we think 0 to 12 is not appropriate, then we can change that. If we think 3 feet is too close or too, not enough or whatever, then we can change that. So I want everybody to understand that everything in this document is basically changeable at this point in time. Lot width, which we sort of interpret as frontage. The RSBO2 zones have a 100-foot rule. Commercial has 50, and then this allows it to get all the way down to 18 feet as a frontage requirement. So, you could definitely have better conformity with all of the lots that are in here. And the idea of maximum frontages, we can talk about that. I don't know if it's necessary or appropriate, but they put in there that there's 200-foot maximum frontage in the proposed zone. Max lot coverage, you can again see that it's been reduced. It's been increased from you can get only up to 25% lot coverage right now in the RSBO2, up to 40% in the commercial, and with the CD4 you'd be able to cover your lot with a structure. Up to 50% of the lot could be covered. So that allows for someone to build a larger building than they could currently now. With building heights, you've got 35, 45 in the two zones existing, and this translates into not a foot measurement, but 2.5 stories, which is essentially about probably there. 35 feet is about the highest you could ever get with 2.5 stories. So just to keep that in mind. Yard types, and I think Brian went through this pretty well. I don't want to necessarily belabor any of that, but I'll just show the differences between, and again, when he says edge yard, side yard, rear yard, those don't necessarily mean, like the rear yard doesn't necessarily mean that the rear yard wouldn't be permitted in a certain zone, but that's not even really relevant anymore because the residential zones have been taken out. So in this case, in the CD4 zone, each of these yard types and the way that the lot is configured is permitted. Now in our current zones, you can see that they're not permitted with our current zoning ordinance. The way we currently allow it is you have to have a setback on all sides, and that's where the edge yard comes into play. There's a setback that goes around all sides of that building. In our current ordinance, we don't have options to do any kind of zero lot lines or bringing the building all the way up to the front. So that would be just something to keep in mind as well as you're comparing these. Roof types. Right now we allow for any type of roof type. This basically is any type. I'm not sure if we need to specify hip, gable, flat, because I don't know what other type of roofs there really are, but I think that pretty much encompasses everything unless you want to get into really architectural terms. Maybe Robert could probably tell us about a few more. But in my mind, that's something we can also work out. Frontage build out. This would be basically the amount of building that can take up the front of your lot. So in our current zoning ordinance, we have a 15-foot side yard setback on each side of the lot. And so you could only take up that portion between those two side yard setback lines. What this is suggesting is just a percentage minimum at the front setback. So it's actually saying you have to use up at least 65% of the front. So it's trying to get you to use up more of the front line for your building than what you would normally have done on this. And it kind of brings buildings to the front, helps to define that public space along the frontage line. CD4, accessory building setbacks. This is regarding outbuildings and sheds and things like that. Now, for residential, obviously, it's not applicable, but if you're talking about RSBO2 and commercial zones, right now we have a 25-foot front setback and a 10-foot front setback. Those are the current setbacks for front. In this case, it would be that setback, well, I'm sorry, the new front setback, which is only 0 to 12, plus a 20-foot minimum. So you add 20 foot onto whatever that setback is. You would place your building, if you placed it at 5 feet from the front lot line, then you would add 20 to that, and that'd be where you could start your outbuilding. So you'd be at 25 feet for your outbuilding. Same thing with the sides. We have a 10 foot and a 10 foot. Those go to 0 in this proposed. So you could actually build a building right up to the lot line with this proposed. Again, we'll have to talk about whether or not we feel that's appropriate, or if we want to have some type of setback. That's to be discussed. And the rear setback, again, it drops from 10 feet on an outbuilding down to 3. So you could push your buildings closer to the lot lines with this, be able to have more yard to work with in the future. And then jumping to characteristic 5, again, this is just that tiny little purple, dark purple portion of your map, or your zoning map, that was centered right at College and Mass Road. This would be the only area where this district would be applicable. And I'll just kind of briefly run through these. It's almost the same, really, as the previous one, but I took out, you can only see there's one zoning district that I compared it to, because everything there is currently commercial. So you can see that now there's a range. Instead of having a minimum 10 foot, you can see there's a smaller range for sides, so you can actually go closer to the sides. And for the rear, you would again be able to go closer to the property lines from your 25-foot setback down to the 3-foot min or 15-foot from center of alley, depending on which one you have. The CD5 lot width frontage, again, has that same 18 to 200 range of frontage, so you would get better flexibility with that. Your commercial zone jumps from 40 up to 75% for your lot coverage. So you'd be able to cover your lot with a building that covered 75% of your lot with this proposed rule. The building heights would be up to 3.5 stories, versus in the CD4 you would be up to 2.5 stories. So you get a little bit more height, and that's, again, consistent with our current zoning ordinance. You'd probably be in about this range anyway, so it's not really that big of a change to our current ordinance. Yard types, in this instance, you're going to see that there are some not permitted yard types in this zone, mainly the edge yard and the side yard, the ones that have the yard going all the way around, or the ones that have one side yard. In this one, they're suggesting that the rear yard be the only yard type, and that all buildings be pushed up to that front lot line, and that they be right next to each other and not have that space, the yards in between, because that's where it's kind of supposed to be the most walkable and the most, I guess, the more intense area that of the other areas. In roof types, again, you have any type of roof type. We'll skip to the next. Frontage build-out, you have 100%. So that's where it's talking about at the front setback line, you want to build up buildings along the entire frontage of your lot, and not having those spaces in between, such as yards or even driveways. I'm not sure if we probably should have some type of allowance for a driveway. I'm not sure how that will work. But I know in the proposed zoning ordinance, they talk about having alleys be the access, or a side yard, a side street being able to get you back in to the rear of your property for those types of properties. So again, things to talk about as a committee, what we want to look like. Accessory building structure setbacks. Again, this is it's exactly the same actually as the CD4. So you get the front setback plus 20, you get 0 feet for the side, and you get 3 on the rear. And so that kind of concludes what I put together as far as a comparison. I didn't go ahead and address issues such as parking or signage, and I just want to make sure, I want to state that those are a little bit more difficult comparisons to make. We've got fairly intense parking regulations and signage regulations, and so it's kind of, I did what I could in the amount of time that I had to be able to give you a comparison of what this does. And I'll take any questions if you do have some.
And the only other thing I would point out is the proposed ordinance under section 18.5 for development plans really presents a new concept that we haven't seen in our zoning ordinance. It provides for the development of a parcel 20 acres or larger. Basically, that's approximately about the size of Goffstown Square, where or Goffstown Plaza, I should say, where Shaw's is now. That's about a 17-acre parcel. So that's when a developer wants to develop a large piece of land or parcels in conjunction, and it provides for, that's where you see, again, that's about a quarter of this document that's a really new to us, that talks about the civic spaces, your thoroughfares, your bike paths, stuff like that. So that's really a new concept that our ordinance doesn't have. Our ordinance has cluster subdivisions when you're talking about residential development that have traditionally been done in the agricultural districts, but 18.5 is really a new concept under this proposed ordinance.
Tony?
Derek, that whole development plan concept is something that would have applied to something like Abingdon Square?
If Abingdon Square met, yes. Whatever you define as that minimum lot size, potentially, yes. It's when you are doing a phased-in approach for development, where a developer would come in and do multiple uses at a time, and exactly.
And we may want to consider, making that a smaller number, especially since Pinardville doesn't really have parcels that are that big. Right. We might want to consider 7 or 10 acres as a large development site in Pinardville that could potentially fit into this category.
Do you have 7 or 10 acres available in Pinardville for building?
Yeah.
Yeah,
there are parcels that are that building.
The Remax building, that's a 35-acre site. Again, the Shaw's Plaza is 17 at a couple adjacent lots. You're right at that 20. So when we talked with the consultant, and I asked the question, where do you come up with 20? And that's where they get into the pedestrian shed of what most people will walk, park their car and frequent a couple different shops or offices, and it factors out to 20 acres is a quarter of a pedestrian shed. So it's basically a reasonable distance for individuals to walk.
John?
Thank you. I just want to make sure that when I made that motion, and I'm very happy with that, I just want to make sure that we have a CIFZ zone, and I'm not sure where that plays in. That's part of the commercial industrial. That's that flex, the McClellan.
That's actually on the other side and outside the study area, so it's not being affected by this at all.
That's actually, if you look up, this is this area here, which is not part of the study zone, and as you go through the plan, that is not at this time proposed to be included in that.
Right, okay.
The benchmark site is also commercial industrial flex now, but my understanding is, as we move forward, we basically need to touch every parcel and decide, are you in or are you out, if we're in fact going to recommend something.
Right, okay.
So I think that needs to be scrutinized. I have a couple more questions.
Thank you.
I don't know if Bill Wright is still on the phone. First
Yep.
of all, yes, that's great. I'd like to we should all get copies of your slides, just so these are referred
In
back
fact,
to.
We've
had
prepared
made
one, and we will
some-
put one on the website as well.
Bill, maybe you could answer these setback questions. They're somewhat related. As we consider reducing setbacks, do we run into fire safety issues that we need to be concerned with? Number two, as we're reducing setbacks, or considering reducing setbacks, do we have sufficient facade control so that abutting neighbors get some protection within this document? And number three, to the extent that we're doing any of this, are you recommending that the I'm going to say the variance issue be controlled through the planning board? Here, that would be through a conditional use permit, or stay with the zoning board, which is a more technical and legalistic process through a variance?
Let me go third to first, I guess, since I can remember the third one because you just said it. The third one is we're proposing that you stay exactly as you are with your variance process. We're not proposing a change to it at all. I didn't follow your question about facade control and abutters. If you could ask me that again.
Well, my concern is this: if we reduce a side setback, for instance, to 0 or 3 or 5, where normally it has been 10 or 25 or more here, we potentially need to better control what is facing an abutting property. And just because the abutter is going to be looking at that property. And my question is, are those types of protections already built in here, or is that a separate design issue that needs to be addressed?
Okay, so you have very specific private frontage provisions that, while they're not to the detail of how many windows you have on your facade, they describe in general terms what the front of the building is about, what it's like. And I guess insofar as the abutters go, the whole process that we're going through is a zoning amendment, and I would suppose that that you all would allow abutters to have their say at that point. And then, and any time there's I guess if there's a development plan submitted, one of these larger ideas, well, let me say this: anything that would have required a site plan review before still requires a site plan review. And so, to the extent that you had that your abutters had protection in that setting, they still have that protection.
A couple of other things, too, to add. One thing that we found is that an abutter that has an objection to the side of a building that is 25 feet from their building has the same objection if it's 0 feet, and vice versa. Either they like the side of the building or they don't, no matter where it is on the lot. The other thing is that we heard loud and clear from the community, and one reason why it's set up this way is that individual property rights on the specific lot are more important than having to worry about something like, I don't like the way that my neighbor's building looks, I'll just build a privacy fence if I don't like it, is what we heard. And so we, the setback, side setbacks and
and kind of facade controls are, the way we were approaching it, were not all of that important in dealing with this. But if you guys have a different approach to it now than you did then, but again, let's say 0 feet versus 3 feet versus 5 feet. At what point is an objectionable facade no longer objectionable?
Well, I guess I'd say another thing is we regulate frontages, but we don't really regulate sides of buildings, because unless one of the sides happens to be on a corner, so that you end up with two frontages. There's nothing that says that the side of a building has to look like anything anywhere in the code. It can, but it's not something that most cities would be comfortable even thinking about regulating. And I guess I'd say, particularly in your town where there is such a strong property rights sentiment. Tell me about, what was the, oh, you want to talk about that some more? That's okay. Go ahead.
I can answer the first question if you like. So the first question was regarding the fire and the materials of a building that would be closer to the property line. That would have to be addressed if we did move forward with, a reduced setback that puts buildings within close proximity to each other. I know the fire department has even mentioned to me time and time again when different proposals are going forward to the Zoning Board of Adjustment for a variance, for example. They want a variance that puts their shed 2 feet from the property line. The fire department comes and says, well, you're going to have to make this a 3-hour fire-rated wall or whatever it is. I don't know what that ruling is, but they would have to, beef up their construction in order to basically make it safe. So in some way or another, that would have to be addressed either through the fire department regulations or our own regulations to make sure that, fire department is satisfied with what the changes would be.
Your existing building code is not going to change at all, and that's, you're talking about fire-rated walls and that sort of thing. If your fire code and your building code covers that right now, it's still going to cover everything. There's a provision at the very beginning of this code that says that the one thing that trumps this code is health and safety ordinances, and that's in order for the fire thing to kick in and have dominance over all of this. But certainly you want to work with your fire chief to make sure that the sorts of things that we're talking about are within acceptable ranges. We found that if you have a building code and fire considerations that are like most places, it's strictly a matter of, let's just say you have 0 lot lines. Let's just say you have 0 setbacks on the sides, which is essentially a townhouse idea. Those things are typically addressed by having firewalls between each unit, and they're, I would suspect that you've already got something like that in place. But you definitely, one of the parties that needs to look at this is the fire chief. Another one is the police chief, and so that needs to be part of this whole process.
Great, thanks, Bill.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else have any questions, comments? You're being mighty quiet.
What's the next step in moving this part of the process forward?
I guess we need to kind of have that discussion. We had originally put the on the schedule that we would try to have comments back by to TPUDC by the 26th of August. Now, it's my desire that we sort of work that system a little bit And, they told us that they were not going to be available to make changes to the document after that date. So it's my desire that we sort of take the reins and make the changes on our own in order to give ourselves some more time to go through this appropriately and make the changes. And we would have to just, I guess, work out whatever details we need to with TPUDC to make that happen. But I would suggest that that's the way we do it in order to make sure we have plenty of time to flesh this out. Because I don't want everyone to feel like we're, again, ramming things down your throats. We're not trying to do
What's
any
your
of that.
tentative planning board date
Well,
on this item?
Tentative planning board wouldn't be until the zoning board. For a recommendation, it's not until December. So we have time in between there. We would have to obviously get a final document out there and have a 30-day review that we can do. So we're looking at sometime probably in October when we get a final document out to people for review. Then we can have enough time after that 30-day review is up to make any changes we need to prior to a December hearing. So
So we could potentially have 30 days before to go through this and mark it up.
yeah, that would be my suggestion. That gives us a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah, I don't want to feel rushed on this.
Yeah.
My knowledge of zoning and codes is limited. I'm looking to this as a learning experience, and I want to be able to take my time to learn it.
Yeah.
So I'm all for us making any changes on our own.
We would just have
taking
to.
our time and doing it and really thinking it through and hashing it through, not only with this committee, but with the public when the time comes, and make sure that we meet all of our needs and wants. That's my personal feelings about this. Anybody else? Rob?
I suggest, is there going to be any more back and forth with TUP?
Yeah, we'll still have some. We'll need to make sure that that's a line of correspondence that we keep open, and they'll actually be there with us presenting when we do go to the boards for recommendation.
So we may recommend something, and they may have a reasoning behind
why it should or shouldn't be.
I'm just looking for that kind of feedback. What
Yeah.
would you suggest, and they can.
Yeah, well, I think that would obviously still be part of what we would expect from them as our consultant. That's their job, is to consult with us and to tell us what they recommend is the appropriate course of action.
So this is all going to be voted on in March, right? Once we get all this done, it's going, okay?
These regulations would be voted on in March.
Okay.
We would put it forward to the planning board in December, and there's 2 public hearings, one in December, one in January.
And this applies to the whole town of Goffstown?
Well, the voters of the whole town of Goffstown would be voting on it, but it would only apply to those areas affected in the
So what you're
map.
saying is that people that live in a town can vote, not taking their vote any way they want, and it won't affect them.
That's the way it's always been.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of people, when they come to rezone their own properties, they send forward a petition, and that
It's the only way
goes
you
on the
can do it.
ballot.
Yeah.
Everybody in town votes on it. It's not just the town officials. It's all the voters. And that's just the way we have it set up in New Hampshire.
Mike?
I guess I'm looking at this, there's an awful lot of work that we need to do that we're gonna put in front of planning, that planning needs to weigh in on. And what I was thinking is perhaps it makes sense that some of these sessions be joint sessions with planning. Is that, John, something that you would be open to?
Sure, certainly.
Do you think it would be beneficial?
Well, that's why I'm here. I mean, I'm the
You're the representative.
representative to the planning board for this. they're certainly welcome to sit in, I guess, and listen. I don't know if,
Anytime we revised the ordinance in a substantial way previously, we basically had a working group that went through line by line to make a recommendation before making a presentation to the planning board. And I would suggest, as I have before, that this committee is that working group, and that I would think that we should take 30 days to review this, to really think it through, to mark it up, and then we need to sit down together, everybody with their copy in front of them, and go through on a line-by-line basis and really talk about what we're trying to do. And what changes, if any, we could be recommending. But that's the only effective way, frankly, for at least a core group to understand what's being proposed so that it could be explained to other people. Just taking this product is not going to educate this committee well enough to explain it to the next committee, let alone explain it to the voters.
I agree. And, I've been on a staff in my previous job where we did revise our code significantly. And that's exactly the way we did it. We had a small working group, and we actually sat around a table discussing every piece of the code to make sure that, whatever it was, we thought about, what if we did this scenario? Would it affect it in this way? And, it's a very in-depth discussion, and it has the potential to take a lot of time to do that. But very important to go through each aspect of the code and make sure that we've vetted all the concerns that are there. And, if it is the entire committee, fine. I would also suggest that we may want to consider having a smaller portion of the committee that has the time or, would be able to put that time in to meet with staff and those people who can put the time in to do it that way as well. That's another option we could have. So,
How long is TPUDC available to us as a resource?
It depends. No, I'm not. I mean, I'm joking, but I'm also not, because all the things that you guys have just described are way beyond our scope and our contracts and all that. So we need to have a conversation with staff and figure out what we need to do to get you guys what you need, where you need to be, and so you can proceed in the way that you want to proceed. And I think probably. I would like to just, stay involved, just to, get, if you guys want to send us something to look at and give thoughts on and those kind of things, that's not that big of a deal, but we can talk about I need to pull out the contract with Brian and Derek and see what we need to do, because there's a lot of changes that need to be made.
If I may, that's a discussion for another day. The fact is that our relationship with a consultant can't drive this process.
Correct.
We need to control this process
Correct.
locally.
What I was getting at, though, was what Rob had commented on, which was if we make some changes and we send it up to TPUDC for their comments as to whether this is something that can or cannot be done, would they be available to make those comments? That's my only concern about how long they would be available to us. Because when I look at the schedule, it says that they're going to be making the presentation at the public hearing in December. So I know that they're going to be available at least until December 17th. Or, no, December 12th. So.
I would frankly propose that 30 days out, we schedule a bunch of meetings to go through this. And having been through it before, that means we potentially pick 2 days a week for 3 weeks in a row to make sure we've set enough time aside to go through it. And frankly, I think everybody should stay involved, but as many people who can be there should be there throughout that whole process. Because If we don't have a fixed schedule, we're never going to get through this thing.
I would also suggest that the meetings be no more than 2.5 hours, because at that point, people start to fade.
Right, and that's why having a series of meetings pre-scheduled will be helpful.
Could we handle it similar to the way we did the plan, where we all dig into it, put our comments on it, post it, and then it might take a couple meetings where we get together and go through them, and if we're in agreement, we take them, and then once we reach the full consensus, we send that to UDC to then respond to all at once, and then we have a follow-up meeting to then go back through it. They accept it or
Well,
suggest a different.
again, that's kind of the process that we're trying to skip, because what they've told us is their schedule is so tight that after the 26th, when we had told them when we're going to give them all these comments, they just don't have the amount of time to be able to do that type of revision after that date. So with us delaying it, we would end up being the ones to make those. Then they could look at it and say, yeah, this looks fine, but they wouldn't be actually going through and doing all the changes. Like when we sent them the revised with all the PDF comments on there, they wouldn't be doing that if we do this change.
26th of what?
26th of August.
And at that point, it's really just a matter of somebody being a typist, essentially. If you guys are going through and changing the document, you don't. That doesn't require any special skill to do that. The most important part is for us to lay our eyes on it, because I'll tell you that a new paradigm shift and doing things in a different way, and it requires a deep understanding of these concepts and principles and the point and character and all of those kind of things. And these character-based or form-based zoning ordinances aren't typically drafted by committee. It's not impossible, especially since we've given you, a great start. But there are, just be aware of unintended consequences from the things that you know now and the things you'll know later. And I think that's where we can probably help you guys, is when you get to a point where there's a new draft, for us to look at it and give you some insights and thoughts on that. But again, we've got to just kind of go through the contract with staff and administration and see what's fair.
One thing that I would point out, sort of as probably the primary scrivener of these sorts of things, is that when you're going through and you're considering all of the options and you're making a change, you need to be aware that the document is set up in a very interdependent and holistic way, so that and the lawyers in the room there will know what I'm talking about. Sometimes when you pull a thread on a garment, just one thread, it can make a whole lot of things go wrong in the garment. And so you need to be just careful of pulling those threads. It's like every time you make a change, realize what it's doing everywhere else. That's the hardest part of what your job's going to be, if you're going to set about to sort of make revisions like that.
Did we get a complimentary copy of Bill's book?
No.
Copy of Bill's book. Oh.
Send us your book, Bill.
The book doesn't say how to draft it, but it is. I mean, the book does. I mean, the book would sort of be helpful in terms of just in terms of the sort of the basis of the whole concept. But I mean, at the same time, that's basically what Brian just went through. So just know that. Here's a for instance. We had another call earlier today with another town, and they were saying, well, why can there only be one principal building on a lot? And I said, well, first of all, the definition of principal building is that it's the main building, and you can only have one main building. But even besides that,
the whole concept of the principal building is a defined term that runs through and through and through and through nearly every provision. And so that if you all of a sudden say, well, there's not going to be a principal building, we can have 4 principal buildings on every lot, or any number the owner might want to put on it. All of a sudden you're trying to regulate all of those buildings as if they were the only building. And just things just start coming apart. And they hadn't appreciated that. They brought the idea up and then immediately saw, oh, I understand why we can't do that. So it's difficult from a standpoint of pulling that thread. It's also you're going to find it difficult. The whole notion of the character code is to create character, and so many of the pieces, not the procedural stuff, so many of the pieces of each element and each metric and all those things go together to make that character. So it's really difficult to start changing some of those things. If you said, well, we really like more say the suburban way that we, in that RSBO2 where we have a 25-foot setback, we really like that better. Well, you have to sort of decide at that point, well, are you trying to create character or are you trying to create a parking lot? And that, it's intended to create a parking lot. And so all of those things, if you let yourself lapse back into the conventional way of thinking, which is what got you where you are right now. If you want to keep thinking conventionally, you keep doing what you're doing. Just leave it just like it is. And it'll keep creating the same result. If you want it to start having character, you have to start realizing that each of those elements that we're talking about regulating is part of that character. So that's.
But I think it sounds like the plan that you guys are thinking about and taking the time and going slow and all that stuff, you'll likely be able to succeed. I wouldn't recommend trying to go it on your own in a couple of meetings, so.
I assume we could buy more time if we need it, though. So that's something we should probably work out depending upon what our schedule ends up being.
And I would just say that would be a decision that falls to the selectmen. It would a recommendation by this ad hoc committee to the selectmen.
Sure.
Okay, any other questions, Rob?
The map itself, what's the process for adopting or recommending that?
That would be along with the same, all in the same recommendation. One would be part of the other. So the document itself.
They call it a regulating plan. It's a zoning map.
Right.
Yeah.
But
So,
in terms of us going through it and
as far as making changes to that, we would have to basically go through it and determine if the outline of that area is appropriate and whether or not the current proposed zoning is also appropriate, and those would all be up for discussion. Now, that might be one thing that we would maybe want to still have TPUDC make changes on, just because they've got maybe the program that kind of created the map. But I don't know how hard it would really be. It might be an easy thing for us to amend that map and just keep going from there too. So that can be something that we sort of discuss as we sort of change the tasks around. But
as we get close to the end of this, it might make sense for us to take a look at that to make sure what we're seeing in here makes sensible and reflected in the map itself in terms of where it is and
Well, they go hand in hand.
Right.
Or at least they should
Yeah.
go hand in hand.
yeah, one wouldn't go without the other.
Just in terms of timing when we look at it and how it fits into the process.
Yeah, we'd want to discuss the map at the same time we're talking about everything else.
Okay.
That'll be part of it.
Okay.
I said
Go
one
ahead.
more quick comment. Just following up on what I was saying a minute ago. If when you're going through with your review, you should, and it's the way I go through when I'm actually doing one of my own documents. assume that the provision is in there for a reason. There are very few provisions that don't have a reason to be in there, and so and it's based on not because I helped write it, but it's based on incredible amounts of really smart people and planning and code writers thinking through it really carefully. So the sort of the presumption, it's not saying that it's infallible by any means, but it is to say the presumption should be sort of, okay, it says this. I wonder why it says that. And once you figure out why it says it, then we might think about changing it. But if you don't know why it says it, you need to understand better why it says it before you change it.
Bill, while we've got you, is it possible to do this as an overlay district?
Tell me what you mean by an overlay district.
Leaving the existing...
Just leave the underlying zoning in place and just put this on top of it.
Put it on top as an option to the property owner.
They have been done that way. It is not a way to it's not, I don't think, a very good way to implement it to try to get your area to change the way that you may want it to change.
Well, we're in.
It'd be a little bit hard for somebody to throw up, suburban, and then right next to it somebody throws up something really great on the next lot, and you'd end up with somewhat of a hodgepodge. But it's, like I said, it's been done.
Because we're really looking at commercial and industrial areas, it may provide us the greatest amount of flexibility as well.
Yeah, you try to keep in your mind that the whole concept here, it's character and it's walkable. And sort of if you allow the old model to be what can be done, because it has so few planning ideas built into the old way, you're going to typically end up with you'll end up with the lowest common denominator, and it won't be walkable. I will assure you that it will not be walkable if they don't choose to, if somebody doesn't choose to go under the character-based way. You'll end up with, and you won't end up with character. It won't be walkable, and you won't have character.
I think one of the biggest concerns about it is doing it that way is that when you look at the market there right now, and kind of how people have been treating the market along the corridor there, all the things that people have been complaining about over the years, and sort of just being thought of as this area that, well, you can have commercial, and that's where all the commercial and industrial stuff goes, and no one cares, and everybody only cares about the village and all that. The reason that the village is what the village is because it decided to be the village, or decided to stay the village, I should say. And at a certain point, you kind of have to, in a place that doesn't have a lot of development pressure, that doesn't have the numbers, the demographic, and sort of the numbers that the retailers are looking for, so that Shaw's is going out of business and all those kind of things. Everybody will just keep on giving you because they don't see the potential and see the vision and see the future. Whereas if you have the standards there that actually have, increased the property value, and people understand that this is what Pinardville is about now. And if it's not business as usual, don't just give us your cheapest, simplest thing that you could ever do and try to make a nickel off of us. But we expect you to do it right because we want to play some character. You kind of have to. If you're really serious about it, you have to make a decision, in my opinion, for it to be executed in any timely manner. It may happen over the time because what happens is one guy does it and everybody sees that people like that better, and the next guy over some period of time. But it's in some ways it's organic, but it also allows for a continuation of a character that is. Doesn't have all the things that are contained within the document in the master plan.
Sometimes we'll see cities they'll make the character-based approach mandatory, like in the corridor, in their primary areas, and then they may make it optional in other areas. But it's, for it to be just a quarter in the first place and then to have it optional, I don't know whether that accomplishes what you're trying to accomplish.
Great.
Most places would do it optional in like the residential, for instance, and mandatory in the commercial. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, we have a recommendation to spend 30 days on our own going through this, tearing it apart as best we can, and then coming back to sit down and tear through it in a group. Do we have...
Don't use that aggressive language, that tearing through part.
Sorry about that.
What you're trying to do is caress it, not tear through it.
By tearing through it, I meant, running through it, not.
Oh, there you go. That meant fast. Rip the paper.
But
that's good.
Do we have
Tiptoe.
a consensus that this is the approach we want to take? That we'll take 30 days to really look it through and then come back as a group and consider all the recommendations that each of us have made.
Yes.
John?
Yeah.
When you do this on your own, there may be something that you don't understand that the person next to you knows. They could explain it to you. So if we could do like self-educating or get together, that way you could do it a lot faster than just saying, okay, I'm going to go home. Well, I think it's this, I think it's that, and have nothing to bounce it off with the reason off about it.
Well, we do have the community plan process still going forward, so that's going to take some of our time. So I would suggest that we have the staff try to set up 4, 5, or 6 meetings for us in a manner that they're relatively close together and that they don't conflict too much with other things going on in town, so that as many people as possible can participate.
Right. But in what frame of time from now? 30 days?
After 30 days.
After the 30-day period that we would get together. Brian, Derek, you can do that? Come up with some meeting dates?
When do we have the planning board on the community plan?
September 12th.
September 12th. So it would be really a process that starts after September 12th.
Right.
Right.
Which gives the planning board the kind of input and control they need, I think.
Okay. If you guys can come up with some dates after the 12th of September for 4 to 6 meetings.
Yep. We'll work
that
on
are that are relatively close together time-wise.
I'll send out a doodle poll. That way everyone can
Fine.
see what everyone else, how everyone else is available.
And as Tony said, make sure that they don't conflict with other goings-on and meetings and whatnot, so that those of us who may sit on other boards won't have a conflict in time. That would be beneficial. Okay, is there anything else? In that case, I'll remind you that on the 20th, which is a week from tonight, we come back to do a final discussion on the community plan prior to its being sent over to the planning board. So I suspect there will be some changes to that besides the motion that was made tonight. So take a last chance look at the plan itself. Come back on next Tuesday at 7 o'clock prepared to deal with that.
Okay, a couple questions on that. Brian, do you have additional comments we haven't seen on that community plan?
I've received a number of letters and such, not necessarily making recommended changes per se. Some people have made recommended changes, and I'd like to try to get those to you prior. I don't have them tonight to be able to hand out, but I'll try to either scan that and send it to you, or whatever that may be, so you can see what the comments are.
That would be great. And,
Yep.
and the second issue, do we have a final public comment period on the 20th?
We do,
Okay, thank you.
we do. In that case, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion. I'll second.
Second?
Yes, I'll second.
All in favor of adjourning? Thank you very much. I'll see you all on the 20th.